You are listening to the Billy Dees Podcast.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the program. As always, I am absolutely thrilled that you are here. If you've never checked us out before, we are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast. Today, I have an interview for you. On the studio line is Jeff Kildow. Jeff, welcome to the program. So glad you are here.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, Billy. Thank you.
All right. Jeff writes alternate history thrillers where war, aviation, espionage, and technology collide with frightening possibilities. He is the son of a World War II veteran, as am I, an Air Force veteran himself, and a retired aerospace engineer, which means when Jeff writes about bombers, atomic threats, secret missions, and the fragile turns of history, he is not building stories on guesswork. He is the author of the Joel Knight Menace series, including Nazi Menace, Red Menace, Fourth Reich Menace, and America Under Attack. Books that ask one of the most, with fiction anyway, one of the most powerful questions: what if history turned just a few degrees darker? And you know what? That's an interesting premise. We'll get into that in just a second. First of all, about you, where are you from?
Originally born in Iowa, grew up in Colorado.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I'm here in Ohio. Father was also a World War II veteran. His brother was actually killed in Okinawa. So I never met him. That was years before I was born. A lot of people say, "You sure it's not your grandfather?" Yeah, it's my father, because I was born very late in life. My dad was in his 50s when I was born. So,
oh my,
yeah, I wasn't. When the GIs came over and there was the baby boom, I mean, he waited about 25 years. to take part in that. But yeah, so I learned a lot about World War II from my dad. He was very much a history guy, and has met real big into the Civil War. Real. Oh man, Civil War was his thing. We went to all the battlefield sites and everything when I was really young. So do you have that history, in terms of, was that always ingrained in you from the very start, or was that something that developed?
No, that was very much ingrained from the start. My dad was a vet, and all of my uncles were vets as well. In fact, one of my uncles lost an eye at Guadalcanal.
Okay.
So yeah, I grew up with World War II folks around me all the time, and that was almost always a subject of conversation when the older guys got together.
Yeah. You talk about just a little tweak here or there, kind of like the Twilight Zone. One little thing changes in history, and it can change the whole ball of wax. Like I said, I'm kind of a history person, especially with World War II, because of my old man. And one of the things that I talk about when it comes to the Third Reich and Hitler and all that, if Hitler would have been just a little bit more sane and actually listened to his advisors, which most historians agree was among the best ever assembled, and he didn't go into Russia with that very large force. At the time, it was, when he invaded Russia, it was at the time the largest force ever put together.
Right.
If he would have listened to his advisors, not had a two-front war, yeah, it's quite possible that the world map might be drawn differently today. What do you think about that? I think most historians, when they speculate on this, they say it would have been a much tougher war.
Yes, I agree completely. Now, even given what you assumed there, the ability for the Nazis to invade England was pretty problematical.
Yeah.
Given that they hadn't given any thought to what it's like to do a cross the water invasion.
Yeah.
But they were a very adaptable people, brilliant when it came to engineering. So they probably could have pulled it off if they really put their minds to it, but it would have been an awful fight.
Yeah. Well, here again, getting back to the irrational side of Hitler, some of his best scientists had to flee the country because they were Jewish. including Einstein.
Yeah, that's right. Einstein,
I guess we're fortunate that he was off his rocker, although it's unfortunate that he managed to rise to power. I'll ask you this one more historical question before we get into your fiction. He rose largely on his ability to speak, to communicate. Now, obviously, once he got into power, once he got a little power, then he started killing off anybody that challenged him. But getting from that point, from somebody who was walking the street to becoming a political figure, he did largely on his ability to communicate. Today, with all social media and everything else, would he have had an easier time or a harder time? Or what kind of a threat does that pose? That when you consider the amount of connection that he could have developed just on his ability to speak?
Oh my, that is an intriguing question. I suspect as clever as he was with motivating people, he might have been a very effective speaker using social media.
Yeah.
I think if you watch any of his speeches, even if you don't understand what he's saying, you can see how the crowds are emotionally reacting. Yeah. So that might be a factor, where that in-person thing.
Yeah.
But you're quite correct. He had a real ability to connect with people at a visceral level.
Yes. And and here again, this isn't praising the guy because people always take this the wrong way, but I would have to say 3 of the best orders of the last century came from the same era, and that was probably FDR, Churchill, and Hitler. I mean, those 3 guys were pretty good at talking. When you talk about alternate history thrillers, let me kind of clarify that. Let me understand this if I'm correct. This isn't necessarily a fictional story that followed the path of historical events, like, say, a love affair that happened during Pearl Harbor or something like that. This is actually something more like Inglourious Bastards, where the attack crew managed to kill Hitler. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, pretty much. Those of us who write alternative history have what we call the point of departure. That is the place in history where things deviate based on our imagination. Mm-hmm. And your comment earlier about small things, I'll give you an example. In my first book, Nazi Menace, in 1936, there was a German Luftwaffe general named Meyer. He was actually head of the Luftwaffe at the time. Mm-hmm. He was just about the only proponent of long-range heavy bombers in Germany at the time. And what happened to him was he was late for a meeting, and he didn't want to wait for the airplane that was going to take him there. He jumped into an airplane and took off without removing the gust locks, which means the airplane was uncontrollable, crashed, and he was killed. And in my story, he doesn't get killed. So that allows him to remain. A political reality, lowercase p, about any bureaucracy is that no concept, no idea survives without a sponsor, an advocate. And so I use that aspect of his being to set the stage for long-range German bombers, which becomes the key factor in Nazi Menace.
Yeah. You seem to have a fascination with the aviation of that time. And there was, that's interesting because when you really peel this back, flight had only been really developed like 50 years earlier.
That's right.
And here we are on fighting a world war, the biggest war that the world has ever seen, encompassed the whole earth. And of course, there's the famous ones like the Mustang and the Corsair as far as fighters go. And of course, there's, all the B bombers, and, the Japanese had the Zeros, which I believe those were powered by Mitsubishi. And, so there was just so many planes that were iconic from that period. Is that kind of why you're fascinated by it? And they also played a role in history, right? I mean, they changed everything.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. I've always been fascinated with aircraft. My dad was too. He always aspired to be a pilot, never could afford to take the training. But from the time I was a little guy, being the oldest kid, Dad to go to the airport to watch the airplanes, and I get to go along. So I just kind of naturally assimilated some of his enthusiasm.
Mm-hmm. Now, you're in the Air Force yourself. I mean, that obviously had to... How was your experience, first of all, in the Air Force, and how did that affect your writing?
Actually, it was a very positive experience. It took me from kind of a naive kid to being a man understanding responsibility, which is one of the best things that happens to you when you serve. I was a missile maintenance technician on a missile that you probably never heard of called the Hound Dog. You heard of it?
No, I'm just acknowledging it's interesting. Yes.
Okay. It served from 1960 to 1972.
Okay.
It was a jet-powered supersonic missile, one under each wing of a B-52. The intention of which was, put it in the perspective of the times, when we were looking at using the B-52s to bomb Russia, and these missiles were designed to fly ahead of the bomber fleet and take out anti-aircraft sites or, fighter fields, that sort of thing. So It was pretty good setup for me, and just made me want to become an engineer even more.
You've done some fascinating work. Tell us a little bit about your engineering work. What was your specialty, and what was your career like?
I had a 34-year-long career with Lockheed Martin. Started with Martin Airplane Company. Most of my career was as a systems engineer, sort of the guy who, the program manager runs the show, but somebody has to write the script, that sort of thing. My job was to coordinate among all the various disciplines, which I found absolutely fascinating, because I had to know a little about a lot, if that makes sense. Sure. And when you're dealing with very complex designs, which I work mostly on spacecraft, which spacecraft are, you got people who are very distinct specialists in various areas, and they tend to be myopic when it comes to everybody else that has to play. And so somebody has to be the coach, and so I found that absolutely fascinating. I loved it.
Well, that's a very storied company for sure. Some of the modern incarnations of what we're doing in space now, with SpaceX and some of this other stuff. Do you miss it? Do you wish, I'd like to get back in it?
I got to the point where the daily drag was being too much. Yeah. I really enjoyed the people. And in fact, I keep in touch with a lot of the folks that I worked with for years. But no, I think I came to a point like most people do. I knew it was time to retire. And so I made a graceful exit.
Yeah. Some people,
I hope it was graceful at any rate.
Well, I'm sure it was. A lot of people have a hard time letting go of it. They just, my uncle, this was on my mother's side, flew in the Navy until they kicked him out. He was just getting too old, and he cried like a baby when he had to leave. What are some of the misconceptions that people have about World War II and military technology? I kind of have a lot of respect for that era in terms of the technology that governed that time period. A lot of people think it's so old, but actually it was way ahead of its time, actually. I think it was. Yeah.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And an observation you can make that kind of puts it in perspective. In 1939, which was before the war in Europe really got going, about half the air forces in the world were still biplanes. By 1945, Germany was flying jet and rocket-powered airplanes. Yeah, in a period of 5.5, 6 years. Yeah, that gives you a rough idea. And a lot of people look at them, they only had propellers. Well, you ought to sit in the cockpit of one of those. Oh yeah, and see what it's like, or look into the engineering aspects of it. They were immensely complex, and in many cases, brilliantly designed. Oh yeah. It's astonishing to me, the kind of things that were designed. And remember now, this was long before the computer, so all of this stuff was designed using a slide rule.
Oh yeah, on one of them slanted desks with the blueprint. Oh yeah,
yep. Oh yeah, real blueprints. Yeah, that's right.
It was amazing to me, the engineering that was done in that way so quickly, because after Pearl Harbor happened, everybody got into gear kind of quickly. And like the scoops on the Mustang. I think the Mustang is the one most people recognize, even if you only have a mild interest in World War II. But there were so many iconic planes. The engineering that went into the Corsair with the wings the way they were for the wheels to be able to land or the way they wanted it to with that big propeller. These were things that were done almost as they were building them. I don't know that people give that era enough respect in terms of the engineering.
Oh, in a lot of ways they don't. I just read an article recently about what the Germans reacted to one of the early Mustangs that they managed to capture intact. Mm-hmm. And they had kind of mocked the scoop underneath it. For those that aren't familiar, the Mustang used a water-cooled engine, and you had to cool it, so they put a radiator underneath the airplane with a scoop that would bring cool air in. Well, just looking at it without knowing, you would think, well, my goodness, that's a huge drag penalty and slow the airplane down. And what they didn't realize is the way that North American aviation designed it, they actually created thrust because of the way they flowed the air through that radiator system.
Yeah. And
so it was a net benefit to the airplane.
Yeah. And you got to keep in mind, like in early 1940, I'm from Ohio, the Wright brothers just got off the ground 40 years earlier. And here they are designing these kinds of planes. It's really amazing. Before I want to, morph into some of your writing and why you feel that the revisionist history is that the proper term? I don't want to.
No, that's not. Revisionist history is where a historian puts their view on it and deliberately distorts it. But mine is fiction, first of all.
Okay, fiction. Yep.
And secondly, the way I write it, I try as much as I can to stay in character for the era,
right?
Including the technology of the era.
Okay.
And trust me, as an engineer, that can be a little tricky because I look at some of the problems that need to be solved to make my story work. I could do it in a minute.
Yeah.
Using modern technology, but I have to use the technology of the 40s instead.
Yeah.
So it gives me a much deeper appreciation for what they accomplished back then.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, when people talk about, well, there were these other designs that, competed with the Wright brothers and they flew too. You can't really take those old designs and make them fly today without knowing a lot more about aerodynamics than the Wright brothers did. I mean, we can make almost any object fly today, and to try and go back and discredit the Wright brothers in some way, I think is very unfair. But
I agree.
Speaking of discredit, I got to ask you this because this comes up so often now because we hear so much about Iran having a nuclear weapon and so on, and I hear this almost apologetic tone that Americans often have about the fact that we dropped 2 bombs at the end of World War II. And I want to be very clear: killing is never a good thing. I don't think that any weapon that is pointed at human beings is a good thing to do. But with that being said, I'm going to say World War II estimates vary, somewhere around 60 million casualties, all told. And the vast majority of those came from 2 countries, and that's Germany and Japan.
Correct.
And Japan and China, and Germany and Russia. Those are the countries that suffered the most under those 2 countries, respectively. So with that being said, ending the war the way we did in Japan ended a very violent regime. And I know that It's easy to look back on it now and say, oh, Japan, it's Mr. Miyagi, wax on, wax off. The Empire of Japan was not like that. If you look at the rape of Nanking and some of the other things.
Oh, correct.
Yes. Them and the Nazis, they were a pretty rough group. And had we not done that, we would have had to go in on the ground. And it would have been bad for both sides. And here's the part, and I'll let you speak about this. The idea is that we somehow let Germany off the hook. Germany had it worse. They were flattened. I mean, by the time that, and we were very generous with the way we handled the end of that war. Japan was an economic powerhouse within 10 years after that war, and certainly 20 years after in the 1960s, an economic powerhouse. Germany just barely got got itself put back together in the 1990s. I mean, they were absolutely decimated, and what the Red Army did to the population when they came through there was unspeakable. So the idea that Germany somehow got off the hook in comparison with Japan is very incorrect. We were up against two very violent, large regimes. When you hear people almost apologize for the fact that, when you hear America villainized because we were the country that used nuclear weapons, what's your response to that?
Oh, I strongly back the decision that Roosevelt made, or Truman actually, made to use the nuclear weapons. We need to understand that the military very carefully studied the idea. They had very, very detailed plans on how they were going to proceed with an invasion, understanding that almost everybody did not know about the atomic bombs. And they looked at Okinawa and what it cost in terms of manpower and time and machinery. The Japanese view of warfare was completely different than the American view. Mm-hmm. To surrender was the greatest of all shame. Those handful of Japanese soldiers who did surrender, many of them would refuse to go back to Japan because the shame was so great. And it was considered a great honor to die for the emperor. Mm-hmm. They were prepared. The Japanese were prepared to defend that island nation to a degree that's almost unbelievable. They actually trained children with sharpened sticks to repel American invaders. They were that level of readiness. Yeah. And they hoarded fuel and ammunition and every airplane that you can imagine, waiting for this big invasion force, which they were going to oppose every square foot of it. Yeah. It would have been a bloodbath for both sides. Yes. And the loss of life would have been probably an order of magnitude greater than it was with those two bombs. Yes. It was, like I said, I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying, yay, bombs. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm just saying that it was an ugly situation. They were fortified, and there was a whole bunch of islands that you would have had to go through to get to Japan, all of which had tunnels built in them, booby traps. You would have had to go foot by foot. That's exactly right. With boots on the ground, and it would have been terrible for everyone. So there's just that perspective out there. I know a lot of people are upset about the fact that the United States did that, and I can understand that. I think what's worse, and here again, this is my opinion, not to get off the subject, but the testing they did out west was kind of reckless in terms of the radiation. Yes, it was very reckless. Yeah. But with that being said, in terms of using it as a weapon of war, we were up against two very, very powerful enemies, and we did the best we could for the circumstances at the time. When we talk about alternate history thrillers, I think that's the proper term. What is intriguing about that? Does it distract the reader when somebody, here again, getting back to Inglourious Bastards, when Hitler is taken out by a commando group? Does it distract the reader, or does it somehow give you another value in saying, well, this is what could have happened? I write for the entertainment value. Yes. So I'm not trying to tap into any kind of deep philosophical import of what I write or what the consequences it would be. It's basically, if I can write a story that entertains me, I humor myself by thinking other people will be entertained as well. Okay. So that's kind of the approach I take. Sure. We're talking about the author of the Joel Knight Menace series. What exactly is this? What kind of the Nazi menace and the Red Menace? What kind of characters are the readers going to follow? Oh, that's interesting. The Joel Knight, for whom the whole series is named, I created him as a 1932 graduate of West Point who was an early aeronautical engineer. Gosh, why do you suppose I chose that? Yeah. I wonder why. Do you have any experience with that? Go ahead. Yeah. And this often happens with new novelists. My first draft of it, Joel Knight, was virtually a mirror image of me.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to come back and change that quite a bit. But I was able to work him into a situation. Here, I got to tell a brief story here
Sure.
to give you an idea.
Absolutely.
I created Joel Knight. Much of the story takes place, by the way, inside the United States during the Second World War. And I had a tough time finding decent data on it because not much is written, strangely enough.
Yeah.
But the situation I created for him was that he was a gunnery instructor at an East Coast air base. And so I had to create an air base in my imagination. Having been to New Jersey a few times, I remembered that southern New Jersey is nice and flat, make a great place for airport. So that's where I created a fictional airport, only to find out that there actually was one at Millville, New Jersey. That's the actual name of the town.
Okay.
Millville Army Air Base, where they trained P-47 pilots to shoot.
Mm-hmm.
I had the delightful opportunity to go there to the museum that's there, and I actually met a man who ended up retiring from the Air Force as a lieutenant colonel, who was almost the duplicate of my fictional hero.
Mm-hmm.
So he was a great fighter pilot, but the government decided he was more valuable training new pilots than he was to go over to the battle in Europe. He ended up going over, by the way, and he actually flew wing for Gabi Gabreski, if you know that name. He was a top ace in Europe in World War II.
Interesting.
But I found that really fun that I came that close to reality without even realizing.
Yeah. Interesting. That's really cool. Obviously you're researching these things, and I know you know a lot just inherently, but when you're writing a book, you have to check on dates and the exact sequence of things and all that. That process, what comes first? An idea? Like, I got this idea for a story, but I'm not exactly sure what happened there. Or does just an area of history find it so fascinating that it kind of just compels you to write a story around it?
Actually, it's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
In my case, generally what I come up with is this idea of how I'm going to start the story. And then I usually have at least a rough idea how it's going to end. And so I have to write it to see what happens in the middle.
Yeah. And that's
but I always try to blend in reality. For example, in the second book, which is Red Menace, that takes place after the end of the Second World War, actually getting up into the time of the Korean War. One of the things that Congress did in their brilliance was they decided there would never be another war, and we didn't need armed forces. And so in a brutal way, they established what was called a RIF, a reduction in force. And it really didn't pay any attention to who the person was as an individual, what they accomplished or what they could offer. So I start that story with my hero, Joel Knight, in that exact situation. Mm-hmm. He's become a lieutenant colonel by the time the war is over, and he wants to stay in. I mean, he's a professional officer. He wants to stay in. And it doesn't look like that's going to happen until a friend of his, who just happens to wear a star, contacts him and says, if you do this little piece of cake mission for the CIA, we can make sure you stay in the Air Force. Mm. That was kind of what set me off. What if he had this cool mission?
Interesting.
And so I set it up. I set up this complex mission, which went to hell in a handbasket almost as soon as it got started, which made it a lot of fun to write.
Yeah.
People making bad assumptions and lack of quality intelligence and all those kind of things, and he ends up in a real mess.
Yeah, well, that's often the case. Often enough.
Yes.
Vintage aircraft. There's a lot that you can see around the country. Now I'm in Ohio. There's obviously the Dayton Museum. There's actually one real close to where I'm at called the Maps Air Museum. A lot of vintage aircraft, not only from World War II, but from Vietnam and some other things. scale modeling, and the preservation of this history. Is that, I'm going to presume that that's a passion of yours.
Absolutely. Yes. In fact, an interesting little data point, a fun fact, if you will, there are more World War II airplanes flying today than there were in the 1950s.
Wow.
Is that mind-blowing?
Yes, it is.
There's, all over the world, there's this huge interest in World War II aviation, and people are literally digging things up. I went to, a couple of years ago, I went down to Colorado Springs, where the Museum of World War II Aviation is. And I got there early in the day, so I had a docent to myself, and he took me around. We were looking at things, and they had a wreckage of a P-47, the Thunderbolt, that was really a pretty rough shape that they're going to restore and put back in the air. And I made the comment, wow, that's a really tough job, a long ways to go. And he turned me around about 90 degrees and said, see that P-38? It came out of the same pit that P-47 was in.
Yeah.
So their abilities to put things back in the air are absolutely astonishing.
Yes. And
one of the real hotbeds of that, by the way, in the whole world would surprise you, is New Zealand.
Oh, really?
There are amazing aircraft coming out of New Zealand. When in the time after the communism fell in Russia, and they opened it up, there were all kinds of airplanes that they found crashed. And the New Zealanders went in there and got dozens of them. And they have, for example, a Polikarpov I-16, which was a single-engine open cockpit fighter that took place in the Spanish Civil War, prior to World War II.
Yeah.
They have like 3 or 4 of them that they've put together from bits and pieces they collect, and they fly them, and they're astonishing,
That's amazing. And a lot of people don't know Spain really wasn't a big player during World War II because they had really done a pretty good job of taking themselves out of anything.
Right.
They had a pretty devastating civil war leading up to World War II, so they weren't a major player for that reason. You talk about some of the stories that your dad has, or at least you mentioned it, some interesting stories. Before I ask you to share one, I'll tell you when we were talking about the atomic bomb. My dad was in the Philippines when that bomb was dropped. And, the news was going around the camp that an atomic bomb had been dropped. And my dad was pretty ahead of his time. He was actually an engineer in the Navy. And, when I knew him, he's still very, very smart. But a young man during that time to understand physics on that level, that was pretty rare in the 1940s.
Yes, it was very rare.
So he knew what an atomic bomb meant, and he said, back then everything was atomic car wash, atomic this and that. It was like atomic fireballs. So he went to one of his commanding officers, and he says, "Now I want to be clear about this." He says, "This was actually an atomic bomb." And he said that his commanding officer said, "Yeah, man, it was an atomic bomb." And he told me, he says, "Well, I knew he didn't know shit." He said he wasn't sure that it was an actual atomic explosion until he got back to the United States. So, interesting. What are some
the fact that he even knew to ask that question put him in the 1% group, that had the understanding of the physics involved.
Yeah, that's true. And he was sharp, real good with math. He had PTSD real bad, not only from the war, but he had a violent childhood and everything. I never really met, my dad died when I was very young. I never really got a chance to interact with him as an adult. And I kind of wish I would have, because he had a lot of issues. But the one thing that he had, and here again, from his engineering background, sine, tangent, cotangent, he could do all those in his head. He just absolutely amazing. So, what are some of what's the story that your father brought to you that kind of inspired you or gave you an interest in what was going on over there?
The one that always comes to mind. My dad was stationed in Alaska during the Second World War. While there was action down on the Aleutian Islands, not much where he was. Where he was at Anchorage. but they were always on edge, because the Japanese had actually invaded there, and who knew whether they would try to come up and actually take Alaska, because that was, one of the biggest things was it was jumping off point for Lend-Lease aircraft going to Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so they were always on alert, and they would have, practice air raids and all this kind of stuff. So you kind of get a feeling of the level of tension that was going on there.
Mm-hmm.
He said they had some P-38s that were there, some of the early models.
Mm-hmm.
And in the dead of night, this one night, this P-38, fully armed or ready to go, had an electrical short, and it set off the machine guns, and it fired every round those 650 caliber machine guns had.
Yeah.
The whole base was convinced they were under attack,
Yeah.
He said it was just an absolute mad scramble for a couple hours before people finally figured out that it was just a mechanical accident.
Wow.
Fortunately, it just fired off into the distance and didn't hit anything. Nobody was injured.
Well, that's good.
But
when people talk about the whole 9 yards, they think that's a football reference, but it's actually a reference to the machine gun chain, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Well, for the audience, the machine gun, had a belt. Forgive my lack of proper use of terminology, but there was a belt that carried the rounds, and there was 9 yards. So when you gave somebody the whole 9 yards, that means you emptied that gun and gave it everything you had.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. Jeff Kildow is the author. The Joel Knight Menace series are the books. Where can people find the books?
They're widely available on Amazon.
Okay.
That's my best source. And for anybody that's in the Denver metro area, this weekend I'll be at the Tattered Cover Bookstore in Littleton with a local author meet and greet. So I'll have an opportunity to meet folks and offer them my books.
That is fantastic. Jeff Kildow here again, the author. My name is Billy Dees. You can find the Billy Dees Podcast on any podcast network. We're on them all, as far as I know. We have over a 10-year history now. And you can, find me kind of like the old Twitter, which is X now. That's kind of like my social media home. I still kind of believe that for trending topics, real-time things, X is kind of the place to be. Thank you so much, Jeff, for being on the program. Well, you got a lot of interesting stories, and, that's a part of our history that more people should know more about. The amount of people that don't know anything about anything really that happened before they were born is really quite amazing. And even
that's sad but true, Billy.
Yeah, even after some time. Yeah. So it's so nice to talk to somebody that has a sense of history. So appreciate you being on. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it, Billy. It was a great time. I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Awesome. And thank you for listening. And we will talk to you again very, very soon. I'm Billy Dees and host of the self-titled podcast, The Billy Dees Podcast. We are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast featuring authors and creators talking about their craft, advocates for community issues, and myself and an array of co-hosts discussing current events. There's no partisan ranting and raving going on here, just great content. You can find the Billy Dees Podcast on your favorite platform and on Twitter @Billy Dees. Thank you, and I hope you listen in.